Michael Mail, welcome to NLTV. Michael is the Chief Executive of the Foundation for Jewish Heritage. Michael, tell us a little about what the FJH does.
Right, okay. Well, so, I'm originally from Glasgow, from the small but beautifully formed Glasgow Jewish community. And originally studied law, went to the Hebrew University of Jerusalem for a year, went to Brandeis University in Boston for a couple of years, did a master's in Jewish studies. And I've had a career working in the Jewish community in London, primarily in Israel, to do with Israel and education. And I'm also a novelist, I should tell you. I've had 3 novels published. That's a whole other story. I've always had a passion for history, right going back to school days. And of course, Jewish history is remarkable, amazing, tragic. And as a result of that interest, I started to get involved in a couple of heritage organizations as a volunteer. So there's a body called ICOMOS, the International Council of Monuments and Sites. One of the big things it does is it advises UNESCO on its World Heritage Program. And I became a trustee of ICOMOS, and I chair their development committee. And in getting involved with ICOMOS, I discovered that there was no organization working internationally on the preservation of Jewish heritage. And I found this extraordinary. I assumed that in New York or Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, there would be such a body, particularly given the story of the Jewish people in the 20th century, which is, if I can put it this way, we moved. Now, we migrated, we were expelled, or of course, we were the Holocaust, we were murdered. Right. So, there's that bold statistic that at the beginning of the 20th century, 9 out of 10 Jews lived in Europe, and today it is 1 out of 10.
Right, right. And of course, when you talk about migration patterns, one of the things that we're going to focus on today is the former Jewish communities of Middle Eastern countries that no longer exist pretty much. And so let's talk about some of that and some of your current work.
Okay, so can I say, Rabbi Friedman, you're absolutely right. It's a story of Warsaw and Vilnius, but it's a story of Baghdad as well, in that, this is what happened, that the Jews do not live where they had lived. What they left behind was a huge heritage. And this has been a Cinderella subject within the Jewish world for some reason, and I think there are reasons, we can discuss that. It's been a neglected subject. And this is what led to the creation of the foundation in 2015. We've got some great trustees, Simon Shama, Lord Danny Finkelstein, Jim Murphy, Dame Helen Hyde.
Amazing.
The first thing we did, and this is what I want to begin with, is we mapped all the historic synagogues of Europe. And this ties in, Rabbi Friedman, with, we're going to have a NATO conversation in due course. So if you don't mind, can I show you this map? We're very proud of it.
Absolutely.
Right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you first. This is the website of the Foundation for Jewish Heritage. I recommend all our viewers to visit it, foundationforjewishheritage.com. And so it begins, and on the these are some of the banner images that we have. And then as you scroll down, you learn about our mission, our challenge, the approach, and what we do. So I'm going to click on the Historic Synagogues of Europe button, and I'm going to go to this dedicated website. This is something, so to begin our work, we wanted to be strategic and we wanted to be proactive in our work. So the question was, what sites would we focus on in addressing the issue of preservation? We felt we should focus on synagogues, which are of course the most iconic buildings of the Jewish people. But we needed to know what were the most important ones and what were the ones in danger. And this is what led to this piece of research. So we commissioned the Center for Jewish Art at the Hebrew University to map all the historic synagogues of Europe. So we've created, I'm going to click on the map to begin with. So this is a dedicated website. It's available, by the way, it's publicly available. It's, as I say, the website is historicsynagogueseurope.org. So these red dots,
amazing, wow, are
the 3,347 historic synagogues that exist in Europe today.
Now, are they all still, they're not all still functioning as synagogues?
No, and in fact, less than a quarter are today functioning synagogues. And again, that tells you that story of the Jews of the Jewish experience of the 20th century. and the emptying out of Jewish life, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe.
Now, even of those quarter, to me, that sounds very high. Were they continuously functioning as synagogues, or they've been reclaimed?
No, well, the ones that are still functioning synagogues generally were functioning in the post-war period.
Right.
So generally, the 3 quarters that are no longer synagogues, we're talking about the Second World War primarily. But of course, in the Soviet Union, and we also had a different experience, which is, you had an anti-religious government, and they were expropriating synagogues prior to the Second World War. So within the Soviet sphere, you've got another story of suppression. And then, of course, you have the Holocaust. Now, I'm going to show you what we've done on this website. So I'm going to hover. Can you see me hovering over location?
Yes.
Yeah. So these are the 48 countries that we've mapped. Now, this is big Europe. So we've included Turkey, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Russia, etc. So this is a way that you can search the database. So if I wanted to know just the synagogues of, Lithuania and Moldova, I just leave them ticked, and that's what would appear on the map.
Right.
Community. So these are all the various communities: Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Karaite, Mountain Jews of Azerbaijan, Georgia, etc. Present usage. So if we wanted to know all the synagogues that are now churches, for example, we can find out. We just leave the church button. So, I mean, this is, and it also shows us which are the ones that are today abandoned, that are still empty today.
So what constitutes? I mean, you must have parameters to be able to determine that something is considered a synagogue versus a shtibel. I mean, who determines what makes the cut?
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, we've actually got under our approach. I'm going to take you to our approach up here once I've finished with the map, and I'll show you the criteria that we've established for the various categories. Okay, so I'll just quickly go through these headings. So under construction materials, so if I want to know all the wooden synagogues that still remain in Europe, I just leave timber ticked, right? Now, this is the 2 most important buttons. Number 1, significance. Now, I'll tell you what I'm going to do, Rabbi Friedman. I'm going to unclick local and regional. So I'm leaving only synagogues that are nationally or internationally significant. Okay. And under condition of the building fabric, I'm going to unclick good and fair and just leave poor and very bad.
Okay.
Right? I'm then going to click the search map, and you'll see all of a sudden there are far less. These are the 160 synagogues that are in the most important, that are in the highest categories of significance and are either in poor or very bad condition. And you'll notice there are 2 in the UK. So this is Sunderland. Oh, this is Sunderland. Wait a minute, I'm going to go back.
Now, there were 2 shuls in Sunderland. There was the Englischer shul and the Beth Medrash. So which one is this one?
This is the Englischer. This is the Englischer, right? This is in, and Rabbi Friedman, it's in the district in Sunderland, which I put a smile on my face. It's called Hendon. Hendon is the neighborhood in Sunderland, right? And the other one, and this is the one, I'm going to open it up because we've been spending more time on this one. This is the synagogue in Merthyr, Tidville in Wales. Now, why I'm showing you this one is we bought this building in 2019. So the foundation now owns this building, and we're going to create a Welsh Jewish Heritage Centre.
Wow.
Right.
Now, so let's talk just a little contemporarily, because I know that your work is ongoing. Just a few weeks ago, you bought the shul in Margate.
And no, that was not us, Rabbi Friedman.
Okay.
Sadly. No, I tell you, we're in touch with the people at Margate. I mean, it was a very interesting project. I'm going to move this camera somewhere a little bit more central. We are in touch with the people in Margate, and very fortunately, like a month before the auction, a white knight came along and decided to buy the building on behalf of the activists who wanted to develop Margate as a cultural and arts venue.
Right.
I can't claim that, Rabbi Friedman, and you'll appreciate that the scope of this is vast, particularly working internationally. So we have to prioritize. And that's why, I mean, we've identified, and I will show you the synagogues, there are 18 synagogues that we've identified across Europe that we're particularly focusing on. One of them is Merthyr, Tidville in Wales. Right? And I'll just show you what's on a typical record. You see, we explain when the building was built, 1872. how long it was active for, what type of community, what address, style, construction material, etc., etc. And then crucially, that category of significance, rating, and condition. And then we have a map at the bottom, right, where we people can see exactly where it is. And I'm going to take you up. This is the main synagogue search facility. So if I want to know all the synagogues of Warsaw, I just put in Warsaw there, and they would come up. You click the search button.
Michael, let me just take you back a moment. So you had highlighted Sunderland.
Yeah.
What were you doing with that building, the Englische there?
Yeah, well, look, I'll tell you, Sunderland is a bit of a longer story. There's a gentleman who is on the board of the United Synagogue, Saul Taylor, and Saul has Sunderland roots. And Saul had a certain plan for the building, which was linked to, I don't know if you've heard of Beamish, Rabbi Friedman, in the Northeast. Have you heard of Beamish?
No.
It's a facility where they've kind of located a number of historic buildings and they put them together, and it's a tourist site. And there was a certain view that the synagogue could be transferred to Beamish.
Okay.
Now, I don't know how much detail you want me to get into, Rabbi Friedman, but it's a long story. Saul was keen to pursue this angle of the Beamish angle. And we were thinking, one of our kind of approaches to this sort of work is that, and we did this with Merthyr, which is before you commence, you do a feasibility study. Another term that's used in the business is an options appraisal. In other words, you can say, what are the options for a building where there's no longer an active community? Right. So what we need to do is find new uses for these buildings, because there's no point coming in, fixing a roof, doing up a building, and then nothing happening to the building, and then you come back 5 years' time and it's in it's once again returned to a horrible state. We have to find new uses for these buildings that meets the needs of today. Right. And this is very much the focus of our work with all the projects that we're dealing with.
Who owns the building right now in Sunderland?
In Sunderland, it's owned by a private businessman, a local businessman. And, it is a listed building. And with a listed building, you're not able to knock it down and build a block of flats. Right. Which, at the risk of defaming him, is probably his preference.
Right.
Right. So this is the challenge. With Merthyr, it's also a listed building. So, and by the way, it's the most important synagogue building that exists in Wales today. And it's one of the most important buildings in Britain, most important synagogue buildings in Britain. It's completely unique. As you saw, it's a little castle, right? Which is quite remarkable. I mean, I'll show you, what I'll do is this, I'll stop sharing. I'm going to take you, I'll take you back to the main website. These are the synagogues that we are working on. So you can see Atlanta, Lithuania, Belarus, Slovakia, Germany, Austria, Turkey. So you can see they're all over Europe. Here is our Merthyr Tidville in the snow on the left. And you can see, by the way, with Merthyr, it's a completely unique building. I mean, I looked at that first and I assumed it must have been a church and then converted into, but it's not. This was in the 1870s. This is a purpose-built synagogue, and it's got a little Welsh dragon on the roof, on the gable at the top. And it's one of the most important synagogue buildings in the UK, and it's been abandoned since 2006. It has been empty, right? And this is, for me, Rabbi Friedman, one of the tragedies, I talked about this being a neglected subject within the Jewish world. We've got this wonderful heritage that stretches back hundreds of years, that talks to a vibrant Jewish life. And of course, when we talk about Eastern Europe, a vibrant Jewish life that was brought to an end, extinguished in the most brutal of circumstances, what remains as the last testament to that Jewish story is these amazing historic synagogues.
So what are the plans?
Jewish people. What's that?
What are the plans for Merthyr Tittville? I mean, if there are no Jews in the area anymore, who will be visiting?
Yeah, well, the idea is, and this is what we do when you go into each of the synagogues, we give an introduction, the challenge, and the plan. So we have a plan for each of them. Here's more images of the synagogue. We plan to turn it into a Welsh Jewish Heritage Centre. So it will tell the 250-year plus history of the Welsh Jewish community, which, by the way, is a special one.
Do you know there's a new Jewish Welsh peer, Lord Wolfson of Tredegar?
I'm writing that down, Rabbi. He's going to become my new best friend. Okay, well, that's good. I'm writing it down. Well, that's interesting. Well, look, I mean, what I found, Rabbi Friedman, is that, all sorts of people with Welsh roots have come forward. And look, the reality is, and I say this as a Scotsman, also watching, sadly, the Glasgow Jewish community declining in numbers, still remaining pretty vibrant. But, I would say, I mean, today, really, Cardiff is where, Jewish life survives, which is the kind of the last stage of what's been a very interesting story of Jewish life right across, the valleys in South Wales, but also in North Wales.
Right.
And it's a fascinating story because the story of Wales, and certainly South Wales, is the story of the Industrial Revolution. So Merthyr Tidville, by the way, a place I had never visited before. Merthyr Tidville in the 19th century was the biggest town in Wales, while Cardiff was a little village. Merthyr, for 50 years, had the largest ironworks in the world.
Amazing.
For 50 years. It was the story of the Industrial Revolution. It's the story of coal, iron, and steel. It attracted huge migration into the town. And of course, Jews. Jews were migrated into town because there was economic opportunities. And Jews played a particular role in South Wales. They were traders, they were peddlers traveling around the valleys. They would then open up little shops. So you had these little communities dotted around the Welsh valleys. And I mean, as I say, Rabbi Friedman, I don't know how much detail you want me to go into, but I'll just give you one example, which I found fascinating of.
Yeah, and then let's move on to Iraq after that.
Yeah, okay. Well, there were lovely stories about, the Welsh obviously feel very much kind of suppressed under the English, certainly historically, and the Welsh language was suppressed, and also being essentially a non-conformist tradition of faith. They identified with the Jewish people as a fellow kind of oppressed nation.
Interesting.
And they were very interested. As you know, there's a huge passion around the Welsh language. And there was a fascination with the Zionist revival of the Hebrew language.
Wow.
Right? And I'll just tell you this one story. The term that is used for attending Welsh language classes is ulpan. Isn't that great?
Wow, that's
they
fascinating.
went over to Israel. They studied the whole system of the revival of the Hebrew language, and they even took the terminology. So There's a number of very interesting connections. What I love about this work is you arrive in a place, you know nothing about it, and the whole world's open up. That can be in Poland, in the Czech Republic, in Turkey, right? So I won't say anything.
I've just made a note now. I know that we offer ulpan classes at the synagogue. I just better check that we're teaching Hebrew, not Welsh.
That's very wise. Very wise. There's a few Welsh people snuck in there. Okay.
So let's talk about Iraq. You've been involved in protecting 2,000 sites across the Middle East from potential bombing by NATO forces. Tell us a little about that.
Yeah, well, what I'll do is I'll stop sharing rather than, yeah. Well, what I'll say, I mean, actually, we identified, look, obviously, we were very conscious of the situation in Syria and Iraq. We were looking at this a few years ago. And also very conscious, of course, the profound heritage of Babylonian Jewry going back 2,600 years, a remarkable story. 1/3 of Baghdad, more than 1/3 of Baghdad was Jewish at the turn of the 20th century. They had a huge impact in the region, of course, had a huge impact historically on the Jewish world and the Jewish people. And, today there is one synagogue that remains, the last legacy. It's called the Tweg Synagogue in Baghdad, for the 7 or 8 Jews who remain in Baghdad and who are keeping a very low profile.
Right.
And so what we wanted to do was to create a record of what physically remains. You know, there was the synagogues. There was also, you know, in that region, there was a number of pilgrimage sites, tombs of prophets in the region that were holy to Jews, also to Christians and to Muslims. And we wanted to create an inventory of what remained. And we commissioned an American organization called ASOR, the American Schools of Oriental Research. And they conducted this work, and they identified 368 sites in Iraq and Syria. And we have this as a database. We're actually going to have it published through the Center for Jewish Art at the Hebrew University. We have a very close relationship with the Center for Jewish Art, and they are going to release this material through their website. We had a bit of a debate whether we should release this material given the possible sensitivities. But the feeling was that a lot of this information is already known.
Sensitivities from whom about what?
That there could be, I mean, look, let me take the most obvious example, which is the Merthyr Tweg Synagogue in Baghdad. For people who wanted to attack Jews, to know that there was a living synagogue round the corner from them, right? And, you know, we know this is a highly volatile part of the world. We didn't want to create targets for people. I mean, of course, ISIS is the most dramatic, and, you know, they blew up the tomb of Jonah in Mosul. You know, there's been acts of violence. You know, there's I mean, we can't say that they were deliberately targeted, but, you know, there was the Sassoon synagogue. In Mosul, there were several synagogues that are now, in effect, in ruins. And there has been some discussions, and this is the other aspect of this, Rabbi Friedman, which was, we are wondering, could we engage in some form of preservation work? And the advice we've been given is that this is not the time, that really the environment is not conducive to undertaking.
So when you talk preservation work, you mean to say with the Iraqi and Syrian governments?
It would have to be, yes, with the authorities, with the Cultural Ministry of Culture. We explored it, and our American colleagues who have got a lot of connections, I should explain to you this, ASOR, the American Schools of Oriental Research. It was formed 130 years ago when all the Ivy League universities got together to coordinate their archaeological digs in the Middle East. Right. So they've been active in the region for decades. They've got their own contacts into the government. Of course, they need their own permissions to do their work. And the advice was, this was not a good time. Now, the exception is the Kurdish region. And with the Kurdish region, which historically has been very sympathetic to the Jewish people and to Israel, there are, shall we say, informally, lots of connections. We've been particularly looking at that one, and we may yet be able to do something. There has been work on the Tomb of Nahum, in the Kurdish region. And I don't know if you've come across a gentleman, Edwin Shuker.
Yes, sure.
Yeah, so, you know, he's been very active.
Right. He had a story with his return to Baghdad or something that he put together.
That's right. And also, you know, David Dan-Gur is also, you know, very interested in this whole area. And,
you know, it strikes me that, you know, apart from these radical extremist groups like ISIS that are, you know, aiming to just destroy everything, for the most part, no matter where you go, it seems that people are committed to preserving historical, cultural sites, even of other religious and ethnic groups. I mean, I went to Egypt a number of years ago and visited the Shul in Cairo, which was just a tourist site, but it was, it was being maintained by the Egyptian government. They had an Egyptian who was running it. They had the area around the Aron Kodesh and the Bima cordoned off. But I went in there, I needed to daven. I pulled out my tallis and tefillin. I started davening one of the pews, and they motioned to me. They opened up the cordon area, and they said, here, you know, you can pray right here by the ark. And I think there's a lot of respect generally, and a sense that, you know, if we're not all respectful of one another's sacred sites, then, you know, it's really the beginning of the end for all of us. Yes. Do you get that impression?
Yes, no, I do. I mean, and I'll tell you, I've met some wonderful non-Jewish people across the world. You know, whenever in Poland, in Lithuania, in Hungary, in non-Jewish people who've dedicated their lives to protecting Jewish heritage and protecting the Jewish story. These are heroic people. They just, you know, as somebody said to me, you know, that they don't want the Jewish story to disappear in Poland. You know, they recognize the huge impact of Jewish culture and civilization on Polish society.
Right.
You know, I was talking to a non-Jewish Lithuanian musician, and he said to me, you know, Jewish culture, he said, we breathe it in. It's in the air, we breathe it in. And this is, you know, 70, 80 years after the Holocaust. It's there. It's just all around you. Its absence is all around you.
Michael, so you've mentioned that now's not the time to preserve Jewish sites, but I do want to, in the last couple of minutes that we have, talk about the work that you're doing just to make sure that the sites are noted by military forces and avoided. Tell us about that.
Yes. So what happened was, of course, there's been a lot of interest around heritage in war zones in recent years, and you know, Palmyra was a big example in Syria. And again, to cut a longer story short, we were given the opportunity of presenting our material to NATO. Now, Rabbi Friedman, I'll just tell you this, in our press release, we were not allowed to mention NATO because they didn't want people phoning them up saying, have you got our synagogue included in your list? Right. So, but essentially it's been registered. So what we have done is we've registered both the inventory of Jewish heritage sites in Syria and Iraq and the inventory of historic synagogues in Europe with the Ministry of Defense in Britain and with NATO. So the idea was that they now know where these sites are and they can take action to avoid damaging them in the event of conflict. Now, of course, we hope this information will never need to be used. Right? That is the hope. But you know, we feel very pleased that these sites are now in the system in these military organizations, and hopefully therefore will avoid being damaged.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for sharing those thoughts with us today and for the incredible work you do on behalf of Jewish history and maintaining and preserving who we are. It's so important for all of us today and for future generations. Yasher Koach, wish you much hatzlacha, only success going forward, and thank you so much for your time.
Well, you are most welcome. It's been lovely meeting you and lovely meeting your congregants.
Thank you.